It is a huge honor today to be interviewing my friend Julian Holmes, who's a dentist from the United Kingdom, who's had a extremely interesting life. He left the United Kingdom. He went to the Strait of Gibraltar, which I guess used to be part of Spain, and now it's part of the United Kingdom. And then eventually, I think went back to the United Kingdom, then ended up in South Africa. And you're calling in today from Cape Town area. Is that
That's
correct?
right. Absolutely,
So
Howard. Yeah, that's why we don't have any video, for which I apologize, but the bandwidth down here is appalling. So sadly, it's voice only.
And another shocking place that has appalling internet is Australia. And they tell me it's because Australia is the same size as the United States or China, but it's so, 90% of the population is just on the a few coastal areas. And they're, you got to go all the message got to go all the way back to Dentaltown, 15,000 miles in Phoenix, then
Something
back.
like that, yes. Yeah.
And the speeds are just atrocious. But so basically, Julian, how long have you been a dentist?
Over 30 years now. In fact, I've just had the notification of our 30-year reunion at Sheffield University. I was intending on being there, but we seem to have inherited in this part of the world the worst of the ex-British paperwork. And my visa now has expired. So if I actually leave the country, I get banned for 5 years. So I'm sort of trying to hang on in here, sort it all out, and then hopefully I'll be able to travel again.
So how many
Because
how many countries have you lectured in dentistry?
just about everywhere apart from South America.
Yeah, and you've been published in over 80 journals, abstracts, articles. I mean, you're a legend. I want to start off with just a macro view. I mean, I'm 53. How old are you, Julian?
60. I was 60 in June.
So I think this is just a really fun opportunity. My podcast viewers, probably it's overweighted the most in young dentists in America. If you're out of school the first 5 years, that's the ones who jumped on smartphones and apps and podcasts before any of us old timers did. But I think this would be a great opportunity for you to tell all the young ones under 30 that have probably just been out 5 years. How has you've seen dentistry in probably five of the continents better than anyone. You've been published forever. Walk them through dentistry. How has dentistry changed from when you got out of school to
Wow.
now, 30 years later? And how is it like also over all these countries? I mean, is dentistry the same in South Africa, London, and the United States and Gibraltar? So just give us your big macroeconomic views, and then hopefully we'll go into where do you think it's all going? Where do you think it's been? Where do you think it is now? And where do you see dentistry going in 10 to 20 years from a research? Are we still just going to be drilling out the holes in teeth?
Okay, let's start real basics now.
Is that enough questions for the intro? Can I just shut up for the rest of the hour?
I think so. Yes, yeah. Christ, you're going to have me rushing around like a blue-ass fly quite soon. Okay, where did we start? I qualified at a time where we didn't wear gloves, or we wore gloves, but really only in a hospital setting. General practice was all about barehanded dentistry and knuckle rides. And then when I went to Gibraltar, I started treating some of the seamen that were on ships with real problems. And it was how many layers of marigolds could I get on to actually, first of all, to actually want to do any treatment for these people. And that was where I really changed my practice of dentistry. And then, of course, the HIV scare came along, which really changed the face of how we clinically manage not just people who are ill, but people in general. And now to actually treat or even touch a patient without a pair of gloves actually feels very strange and very odd. I started off, I remember sitting in a dental chair as a child where this guy had to treadle away quite hard to keep his rotors turning. So I've seen dentistry move from a treadle mill, rather like a pedal sewing machine, go through to the electric motors, to then the turbines. And sad to say, I'm actually suffered from it too, in that I have now middle ear deafness because of the actual high frequency that some of our turbines work at. And so if I'm if I was talking to a newly qualified dentist, I'd be saying, look after your health. Really do a lot of online research to take the right nutrients. Protect your ears. Protect your eyes. Don't go for fancy small glasses. Go for a pair of glasses which look like huge goggles. Because if you lose your eyesight, you're really screwed as far as dentistry is concerned. And look after your health. Do exercise. Make sure you have time away from a practice. I remember, I built a practice, I sold it, I built another practice, and I sold that, and actually made myself quite ill because I didn't spend enough time out just enjoying life. I was so locked into either making the practice work, or building the practice, or having to meet bills that you actually lose sight of having a life. So I would urge young dentists to try and balance your life as much as possible, because if you don't, then well, you don't want to wind up like me, and you certainly don't want to wind up ill. And I think both of us, Howard, have lost a lot of hair because of stress and dentistry. And materials have changed as well. I grew up in an area where we actually still hand mixed amalgam, and then it went to encapsulated amalgam, and then we binned amalgam altogether because quite a lot of us decided it was unsafe. And then we started putting in plastics and composites. And then along comes a whole bunch of research, certainly which I've published around, which showed us the plastics and composites are really probably no better from the bisphenol aspect of poisoning the human reproductive system. And if you look at some of the research which was published from the Netherlands, the researchers there have suggested that the decline in the birth rate in the Western world is purely down to plastics and the pseudo hormones which we've actually put into our patients and into our bodies as well. So I'll be looking to, if you have to do a filling or if you have to drill a tooth, look at something like using either gold or go back to looking at some of the newer milling machines where you can mill an inlay and just drop it straight in. And that I think would be a fantastic way. And if I was starting, I would be definitely looking at that sort of technology. In terms of fillings, I still like the minimal invasive technique where we're using air abrasion. I think it's very undersold. I think it's very underused. It's a very old technology, which still, I believe, has a fantastic place in the management of people. And of course, if you combine that with advanced detection systems, the Diagnostic, even though it's relatively old now, probably hasn't been superseded in any sort of real way by any of the other technologies for diagnosing early decay long before you can see it on X-ray. And if I can share quite briefly with your audience that I've been up before our professional councils in the UK, and part of their case against me was I didn't take X-rays, and yet I knew that if I did take an X-ray, it wouldn't actually add to my diagnosis, and it wouldn't actually add to the way that I was going to treat the patient, because I'd already taken the diagnose readings. To take an X-ray, I wouldn't see anything. So I sometimes look at some of the things we're told we should do or we have to do to, if you like, protect our backs, and as part of informed consent and as part of our protection against being sued. I think sometimes we've created an atmosphere where patients are invited to sue us. We probably deserve everything we get because as a profession, we're not very good at sort of sometimes talking to our patients. And at times, I believe that we do sort of set ourselves up for failure. And it's trying to teach young dentists how to avoid some of those pitfalls. And certainly that's where some of my lectures have now moved to, quite apart from, of course, Ozone, which, I've been publishing now research articles about ozone for the last 20, 25 years, that and tooth whitening. So, it's actually quite nice now to be in a position where I can share that information and I can share that experience and hopefully show younger practitioners that dentistry has a fantastic future. As far as I'm aware, there's no real evolution which has allowed man to develop without teeth. So we've still got 32 teeth. We've still got 32 opportunities, 3 or 4 times a year, or however you wish to set your practice up. Not only to look after our patients, but also as a specialist community to actually have an income as well. So I think that would be my macro overview, Howard, of sort of where dentistry has been for me and where I feel it's going. I think we fail our patients a lot of the time in that we don't diagnose early enough. We do have some really advanced technology which can help us, and when we do have to intervene, we still have that horrendous aspect of dentistry, which is tooth extraction. And one of the reasons why, if you look at Pankey, one of the reasons he set up the Pankey Institute was he just got tired of taking teeth out. And likewise, when I was working in dental school, I took a lot of teeth out. And in my first year of practice, I took a huge amount of teeth out. And it was very nice to step to one side, enter private practice and say, there are alternatives to actually having to take teeth out. So, I think that's pretty much sums sort of what I've seen. And of course, implants. Implants have changed people's lives. They've gone from being edentulous to suddenly having a new set of teeth. And of course, they come with their own set of problems. So there's, research is still continuing as to how do we save the implant, which is not looking quite so good. We have failures as well as we do successes. And I have to sort of, at this stage, I would say, I am quite biased in some of the research which I've been involved in, because once I took Ozone on into practice, the level of failure basically disappeared. We had cases of putting implants in where we didn't even sort of come close to the 5% failure rate, which was being talked about in the dental journals for the upper and lower arches. We were like sort of 1 or 2%, and the cases which were starting to fail, we managed to rescue. And so again, when I talk about implants in some of the lectures and presentations, Ozone forms part of that treatment management. And I guess in having moved sort of one foot out of clinical dentistry and into actually manufacturing dental equipment, part of the protocols for Ozone in general dental care is that Ozone has a part to play in every single facet of a patient management, not just in dentistry, but also in medicine, in veterinary care. And of course, we all live in modern towns where all our water supplies are ozone treated anyway. So you can't get away from, if you like, my favorite area of research, which I guess is ozone.
And why don't we start from scratch there? I'm sure there are a lot of kids who got all the way out of dental school in a U.S. dental school where all your work on ozone might not have been taught. It might not be part of the curriculum. I feel sorry for dental schools. A lot of older dentists, they're always complaining that, the dental schools don't teach this, the dental schools don't teach that. I'm in dental schools a lot, and to take 100 kids off the street and 4 years later turn them loose on root canals, fillings, and crowns and implants, the dental schools are overwhelmed. And so why don't you start? So basically, the premise is that, we basically fight 2 gram-negative facultative anaerobes, Streptococcus mutans that dies in oxygen, and P. gingivalis that dies in oxygen. And you were the first person that I ever heard about that was actually, instead of trying to kill these bugs by drilling and filling, you were putting ozone on them. So why don't you walk us through the beginning and did it take off in more countries more so than others? And where is it at now? And do you see it making a rebirth or?
Okay, well, I wasn't the first, Howard.
Who was the first?
The guy who actually made that sort of essential link with ozone was a dentist called Edwin Fish, and he was back in the sort of late or the early 1900s.
Well,
and
how do you spell his last name?
Fish.
Like the fish, and he was a dentist?
Yeah, he was a dentist in Switzerland and Germany. And he really started the ozone movement within dentistry in a very small way. How myself and Edward Lynch, who's now at Warwick University, really sort of stepped into this is that we were doing quite a lot of research around tooth whitening. And at one of the conferences, we were sort of chatting away over dinner and discussing about who'd asked what question. And somebody came along to the table and said, you really ought to go and have a see what's happening in the next door conference center, because they're all talking about ozone. And I went, oh, that's very interesting. And then carried on with my conversation. And the next minute, I know Edward is sort of digging me in the ribs saying, this is what we need. This is what we need. This is what we've been looking for. And he made that essential link, which I guess is why he's prof and I'm just an ordinary dentist. He made the link where he could see that ozone would kill the biofilm. And if you could kill the biofilm and the bugs which cause decay, you could then put in place the chemistry which would cause remineralization without the need to drill and fill. So our first premise was, can we show that ozone kills bugs? So we have this special machine, which is called HMNR, and we can actually look inside the chemistry of what happens. We knew that the dental research community would have an enjoyable amount of fun to completely dismantling the research unless we went back to basics. So we went right back to basics of the chemistry with the bugs, what happens to tooth samples before and after. And what we showed was the profile of all the bacterial byproducts and bioacids are completely neutralized. They go from a pH of about 2, 2.5 to a pH of about 6, 7. And if you change the pH and you take away the biofilm and the bioacids, the only thing that's left for that tooth to do is actually suck up minerals again, because you've changed the whole environment. Then we took it into Belfast University, where Edward was working at the time, and a whole team of PhD students, of whom I was just one. We started looking at different facets. So my facet was looking at tooth whitening, but I very quickly got distracted, and along came ozone. Ozone dissolved in various oils, so I went off in one direction, and the ozone research on, if you like, hard tissue surfaces went in a different direction, and now we're just looking at ozone in healthcare in general. So where we are now is that we know that we can reverse decay, we know that we can allow remineralization to occur. One of the questions I was asked a few years ago now by an American dentist was, how could I be so sure that it worked on American teeth? Because we've got all the studies were done in Europe at that stage. And I just looked at this guy and said, where do you think most Americans have their ancestors? And so I think that sort of put that very neatly back into context for that particular gentleman. Where ozone really started as far as the clinics in the UK. That was where Cavo was, that was where Edward was, and we had the Healer Zone, which was made by Carvo, and we had the foundation user group, which was actually 20 selected practitioners. And we started publishing papers. This was back in 2002, 2003. From there, Edward and I went to lecture in Europe, and we started teaching in Europe at various meetings. We traveled to Hong Kong together. I've done an interesting trip around New Zealand and Australia. Edward has traveled in virtually every single country, I think, again, apart from South America. And then I got invited to one of Chris Kammer's and to the Generation Next group, and I started promoting ozone at those meetings, and that was really where we started to see users start to take the ozone, take that research and actually put it into practice in the US and in Canada as well. So now we actually have a very strong footprint in Canada, in the US. It's very strong in Europe. We still have users in Australia and New Zealand. We have people I know who are using homemade machines in India. Bill Dom, who is the current chairman and president of the International Association of Ozone and Healthcare, and it used to be Dentistry. He took a group of people and went to China a couple of months ago. And late last year, the International Association had a meeting in Cuba. And I'd lectured in Cuba and been exposed to some of their early research back in 2003, 2004. And I brought that back into the UK, and I brought that into my own research. And now we're working quite closely with some of the Cuban scientists, really progressing the research in terms of general healthcare, wound healing, and there's quite a lot of research now which is looking at facial and basically body rejuvenation. So it's really moved. I mean, I guess I've taken 1 foot. I used to have 2 feet in dentistry. I've now got 1 foot in medicine and 1 foot in dentistry. Can be fairly uncomfortable at times, but I think I'm probably having more fun now than at any other time in my professional career. And because I've been around at a time where it's always being in the right place at the right time, Howard. And I'm sure you've had experiences like this for you, where you've been able to make a difference in not just 1 or 2 people's lives, but in a huge number of different lives. And yeah, I now in this country I've set up an ozone clinic, and I work with ozone therapists, and I also work with doctors who treat with ozone. And I've been able to help people whose legs have been scheduled for amputation. We've actually managed to save the leg. So we've been able to combat the infection, we've actually healed the ulcer, and we can now manage that patient for the rest of his lifetime. Likewise, we have patients with cancer who we can actually show no longer have that huge growth of uncontrolled tissue, which is going to kill them. We've lost patients as well. It's not 100% cure, but we do offer hope for some people who've been told, you got 4 months, and yet we've been able to extend their lives usefully for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or more years. And so for me, ozone has opened a new dimension, a new area of my training, where it's almost sort of being of service and giving back to a community. As a private dentist, I certainly feel that I exploited the opportunity to make money. Here in South Africa, people don't have a lot of money, and it's very nice to actually be able to offer something of myself and say, we have a system which doesn't cost very much money. We can treat you with this, and really, that's where I am now.
Now you're treating decay mostly with the ozone in South Africa.
In South Africa, it's everything from decay. So I work with a couple of dentists in Cape Town and around South Africa, but I also work with medical people where we're treating ulcers, we're treating skin disease, we treat malaria, we treat HIV patients. So it really is completely across the board, and that's why I said earlier, I don't consider myself a dentist strictly any longer. I am in healthcare, and I firmly believe that dentists, even though we train and we become very focused in what we do, dentistry is not about 32 teeth. It's actually about the overall health of a patient. Because remember, there's a lot of medicine that presents to us, and we see disease long before the general practitioner, the general medical practitioner, even gets a chance to step in. And it's that aspect of dentistry which I'm actually enjoying currently, in that I've moved, if you like, away from dentistry, and I'm now in healthcare, and I'm offering, if you like, a suite of services. So it does include dental work. So I do offer dental advice, and I work with dentists here, but I probably do more medicine related work now. So I've sort of moved away from strictly being a dentist, Howard.
So tell our viewers, all my fans of the podcast, they're all dentists, so they're probably not as interested in malaria and what have you. But how do you actually treat a cavity with malaria? And also back to your early comment on Diagnostic. I think most people think Diagnostic diagnoses occlusal pit and fissure
No,
decay. How do you use that for interproximal without the need of X-rays?
Okay. Diagnostic is just an aid to diagnosis. So you need to use it with other tools. So occlusal pit and fissures, I think everybody doesn't have an issue with Diagnostic, because we all know that it works on a laser system. The light shines into the tooth, it measures what comes back and gives you a number, and it also gives you a call sign as well. And that tone, you can virtually track how the decay is tracking. where you have interproximal decay, or where you have the beginnings of interproximal decay, transillumination I've always found to be really useful, and I will still use that. And what I would probably do, if I know that I've got occlusal decay, I can probably guarantee that somewhere along the line I've got interproximal demineralization. So I'm probably already thinking in terms of unless we've got a frank hole, which I can find, I'm looking to remineralize those teeth as fast as I possibly can. And to do that, traditionally what you do is you can't remineralize, you basically open up a large hole, you dig a class 1 or a class 2 cavity, and then you put something in it, whatever that may be. For me, what I tend to do more for my dental patients now is I build a full mouth shield, and we hook them up to an ozone machine, and we pump ozone into that full mouth tray for between 10 and 20 minutes. That has a number of effects. First of all, Howard, it will kill all the bacterial content around those teeth. Good guys, bad guys of a lot. It sets up the complete arch for remineralization. As a byproduct, it also whitens the teeth as well. So we've got now the biochemistry has been set up for remineralization. We give them, as all dentists do, we give them a nice pep talk on oral hygiene, continuing care at home, and what toothpaste currently are the best out there. And there are a number of really good toothpastes, but probably the ones which I recommend most are Sensodyne Repair, because it contains Novomin. And although there are more modern versions of Novomin which are coming through, Novomin has such a brilliant pedigree that it will act not only in acid but also alkaline conditions. We know that the remineralization systems work, and irrespective of how you feel remineralization works or doesn't, we can actually chemically and from the research show that remineralization with Novomin is probably the best way forward for the majority of patients. And so it's all about diet, oral hygiene, keeping the mineral content of the saliva as high as possible, keeping the teeth clean as possible. So again, we're going to be talking about flossing, and there's a new system which I can actually talk to you about now. I couldn't a couple of weeks ago, where we have microencapsulated ozonated oils, so we can impregnate a dental floss with ozonated fluids in a microcapsule, which then become active as you start to floss between teeth. And this allows the ozone treatment to continue at an at-home basis as well. So that's your diagnosis. Treating it, I would use ozone in virtually every single instance because it's a technology which I'm used to using. I've used it for 20 plus years now. I would totally agree with you that the vast majority of dentists coming out of dental school, the way they've heard of ozone is probably there's a diminishing amount of it above their heads and they're going to fry, and so you need to put some extra head protection on. But ozone has been around in medicine now for nearly 200 years. So it's not a new technology from that point of view. The FDA in your country still has a problem with ozone, which I think is very sad. We don't have a similar prescriptive organization in Europe where ozone is used almost on an everyday occurrence in general healthcare. The American Association of Ozone Therapists, AAO2, led by Frank Schallenberger, probably is your greatest promoter, along with the International Association of Ozone in Healthcare, which is a group which I helped founded 3-4 years ago, and I've stepped down from presidency of that, and Bill Dommer's now taken that over. So we're planning a conference next year, which will be in 26th to 30th of October in Tampa, in Florida, 2016, where we will be progressing how ozone is used in dentistry, but also opening it up to healthcare therapists in medicine and also in veterinary and in industrial care. Because remember, as I said earlier, we're in healthcare. We're not just dentists. So there's an opportunity to actually talk with colleagues from a number of different specialties. And Howard, it was something which I've just been I have one of the committee members of the International Association here is actually on vacation at the time, and we'd like to extend an invitation to you to come and talk to us. So if you have time, I'd like you to make a note in your diary, Tampa, Florida, 2016, 26th to 30th October. So,
and what will you be teaching there at that conference?
We're going to have vets, we're going to have doctors, and we're going to have dentists who will be talking about their experience with the use of ozone in general healthcare and within their subspecialties. We're also going to be running workshops to actually show people how ozone can be used in those specialties as well. I'm running a workshop on the use of ozonated oils. For me, ozonated oils have really opened up a completely different area of my practice in that I can now treat gum disease, I can treat failing implants, I can treat dry. I can't remember the last when I saw a dry socket, certainly not one that I'd created. We treat wounds, herpes, basically you name it. The ozonated oils or the ozonated liquids have a role in that patient management. And so we'll be opening that whole facet of research up to show people how to make these oils. If they don't want to make them, who makes, if you like, the best oils, how to apply them, what protocols to use, and really sort of open it up to as a general forum for practitioners to come along, listen to some of the world experts on ozone, not just from the US, but also from Europe and from the UK and myself from South Africa. We'll be there giving delegates 30 plus years of clinical experience with some of these technologies so that we can actually progress its use within healthcare itself.
So tell the viewers who are listening from around the world, we have people downloading this podcast from 206 countries. What is it like being a dentist in South Africa? Do they use water fluoridation? Do they drink a lot of Coke or soda? What is the Decay like? What is the delivery system? Give us a first world report on dentistry in South Africa.
Dentistry in South Africa is, for the clinician, quite difficult. Most of the material we use is imported, and at the moment, just to set the scene, the pound rand exchange rate about 6 or 7 months ago was about 15. Now it's 21, 22. For the dollar, it was about 10. It's now about 15. So everything which is imported suddenly become 15, 20, 30% more expensive. And that goes for implants as well. So running a business which is totally reliant on importing product from other parts of the world is a challenge. Dentists are governed by various rules in this country about what they can charge. Private practice is relatively rare in that private practice is actually controlled by the government and by the health committees. There is a public service which is available, very basic. In general terms, in the poorer communities, it's extraction and nothing else. I remember about 30 years ago when I worked in Spain, you'd walk along the beach and this really pretty Spanish girl would come up towards you and you'd smile, she'd smile, and you thought, holy shit, when you saw basically a whole series of class 4 holes going from 3 to 3. And that's the sort of thing which is more prevalent in this country in the poorer populations.
And how many people live in South Africa, and how many of those would you say are poor versus how many are those that would be considered a typical middle class you would see like in London or Germany?
Okay, we've got about 60 million people here. There are probably about, I would say, between 30 and 40% of those would be classified as poor, in terms that they would seek the government style dental treatments. So they they would be predominantly be classified as black, Asian, coloured, and of mixed ethnic origins.
So that's 30 to 40 million out of 60. So
Yeah.
half to 2/3.
Yeah. I mean, in the same way that Europe is suffering an influx of refugees, South Africa has a set of refugees which come from the northern borders. And those people tend to come from the poorer countries seeking an economic relief. Basically, most of the people that I see are of European origin, so that I tend to see people who have really good oral hygiene, who have well, solid, grounded dental knowledge, and who are well versed in what they can find on the internet. That is not the majority. If I go out to, say, Kailicha, which is one of our townships, the vast majority of the people I see there, especially if they're from 30 or older, they will probably have dentures. And if they don't have dentures, they'll be missing probably between 20 to 30% of their teeth.
And is that because they have a high sugar diet too? I mean,
oh yeah, I mean,
do they have water fluoridation? Is it just a lot of soda? I mean, why?
Okay, we have numerous fast food companies down here who are promoting very heavily their products, and the number one drink is Coca-Cola, Coke or Coke lookalikes. Pardon me. The effect of that has been devastating in terms of obesity.
When did you first see that? I mean, were you in South Africa?
Came here.
So Coke was there before you were there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, Coke. I mean, I remember when Coke first came to the UK, and we all went crazy about it until we suddenly realised what it was actually doing to teeth. You know, this country still hasn't actually got around. If I compare, say, in the schools where a lot of fizzy drinks are now banned, in this country they're still actively promoted. I was at a hospital about 6-7 months ago, and this huge container of Coca-Cola rolls up, and I'm actually sitting with one of the leading dental pathologists, who just looked at this and said, you know, I have tried so many times to get this stuff banned. It causes so much decay and so much illness with my patients.
Well, when I was doing charity dentistry to orphanage in Tanzania, some of the healthcare professionals there were telling me that a lot of health care professionals were recommending to drink Coke because the alternative might be dirty water with cholera, and death from diarrhea is put at nearly 4 million Earthlings a year. Do the South Africans all have clean chlorinated water, and is there fluoride in it, or are they drinking Coke because they don't want to drink dirty water?
Well, we do have bottled water as well, Howard, and there is clean tap water is actually taken into these townships. But you're right, and certainly in the rural areas there is a huge problem with pollution, and it's not just pollution from sort of the bugs, but it's also industrial pollution from the old gold mines and from the old copper mines as well, which exist in this country. So, from that point of view, you're quite correct. If you're drinking a bottled drink of whatever origin, you're probably less likely to wind up with a very nasty infection or disease. The issue now becomes is how do you control that, and how do you control an emerging population of people that actually has an obesity issue, that has health issues, and also that has decay issues. And as a country, this South Africa really hasn't got a grip on, if you like, a public funded lookalike to either Obamacare or the NHS that exists in the UK. It's simply not there, and as yet there's no political will to actually put that in place either. So it's left to healthcare providers like myself and to emerging dental students from the various universities in this country to try and put together and formulate some sort of healthcare protocol where hopefully we can actually manage the decay we see, we can manage the obesity, we can actually manage the disease which we see too.
And how long have you actually been in the UK? I mean, in South Africa.
I came here to lecture 25 years ago. I've been here full time since 2000.
You've been there
So,
full time since 2000. And when was apartheid? When was
oh,
apartheid ended?
that was 70. No, about it was the late 80s, early 90s that was
So
dismantled.
from 2000 to 2015, are you seeing South Africa in those 15 years? You see it getting better, faster, easier? Do you see it making progress to where you think another 15 years it'll be richer, better, higher tech, et cetera? Or do you see it plateaued? Or I mean, are the problems how big are the economic issues in South Africa?
Interesting question. Um, from my own perspective, what I see is an emerging black middle class who will eventually drive out the ruling party, and we will see, hopefully, great changes for the positive. Currently, we have a group of politicians who are only interested in squirreling away as much money coming from the country as they can possibly get their hands on, usually in Swiss numbered bank accounts. So the money doesn't get actually spent where it should do. It gets diverted into private retirement funds. And as a healthcare provider, it is distressing at times to see the levels of poverty and the levels of infection and disease, which, if they actually put their minds to it and use the funds correctly, could be actually, we could address them in this country. That's my take. Yeah, I'm sure.
I've flown, so many flights to so many countries, and a couple of times I've sat next to people in airplanes that were aid developers, United Nations, center, et cetera. And they always say the same joke. They always say, in America, they say, I met a businessman in America, and he pointed to that bridge, and he says, "See that bridge over there? Government contract. I pocketed 10%." And then you go to China, and you say, the businessman says, "See that bridge there?" And you say, "Yeah." He goes, "I pocketed 25%. And they go, "Yeah." And then you go to Africa, and the businessman says, "See that bridge over the river?" And the guy says, "No." And he goes, "Yeah, I know. I pocketed 100%."
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so
Yep.
the economist has always said that if they could line up the success of the economics of all 206 countries, that law and order will predict economic outcome more than anything. I mean, if the government's corrupt, if there's kickbacks, bribes, nepotism, all that stuff is what hurts an economy more than any other variable. I mean, you just can't build a great economy if you can't have investment dollars come in there and invested under the rule of law, and everybody knows what rules they're playing by to get the return on investment. So yeah, it's a tricky situation.
I would totally agree with you. And we
And
had
why
a
and why did you personally, of all the places? I mean, you've lived in you've been all around the world. I mean, you've basically lectured in every major city. You said except for most of South Africa. I mean, most South America. Why do you choose to stay in South Africa?
I came here 25 years ago, Howard. I lectured first off in Joburg, and then I went to Durban. I was brought up in the Far East, Singapore and Malaya, back in the 60s. So Durban felt a little bit more like home than anywhere else I'd actually lived. And then I came to Cape Town. Cape Town was, for me, like coming home. That's the only way I can describe it to you. And as the plane sort of came in, and you had this fantastic view of Table Mountain on one side, and what at that stage was the sand dunes of Cape Flats stretching all the way down to Somerset West and Stellenbosch, I felt this incredible sense of ease. I stayed a week. I organised study groups, so I had to come back, or at least that was my entry excuse to come back. And and irrespective of the problems which are here, for me, South Africa or Africa is home. That's the only way I can describe it to you. I was warned, was that if you, as soon as you go to Africa, it gets under your skin, and absolutely, you know, I came here once, I had to come back, and then I had to come back another time, and then I moved here. I live here. This is my home. My wife is here. Our house is here. We have two dogs. A lifestyle which is dictated, by sometimes a government which rather wasn't in power. But we all have issues, irrespective of where we live, with whoever's in charge at the time. I don't. Yes, it is an unsafe country in some respects, in that life is very cheap in this country, and they will tend to shoot you for a cell phone. But then that happens also in London, it happens in Europe, it happens in the States. So personally, I don't see any difference in the dangers of South Africa to being in any other country.
And for the American listeners, who are some of the ozone champions in America? I know there's
Chris Kammer,
Chris
Bill
Kemmer.
Dolphin.
No, Chris Kemmer he's in Wisconsin or where's he
in
at?
Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah.
Madison, Wisconsin, and he's also known as he's a great marketer too.
Dr. Chris. He's I've known Chris for 20 plus years. He's probably my number one friend in the States. I think he's an amazing guy, really passionate about dentistry and very passionate about getting the best for his patients. I would put certainly Bill Dom. He's in Upland in California. Bill's sort of just retired, but he's introduced probably more dentists to ozone than any other person in the US.
Bill Dom.
Yeah. Then you have Eric Zemeski, Mark Weisner, Sandra Lilo, who's in, she is down in Florida. But there are literally hundreds of dentists. I mean, if you look at New York, you've got Jonathan Abenheim, he springs to mind. Peter Silver, he's in central New York. And if you go on to one of the websites which I look after, which is the ozone.cc, there's a huge list of people in the States who are on that site.
So Bill Dom, he's a blogger too, isn't he?
Sorry, say again?
Bill Dom, he does a lot of blogging, doesn't he?
He might do, but I haven't seen any of it. But I know that he certainly does a lot of publishing and he does a lot of teaching, and he's flying continually between North America and South America and taking ozone into South America to help communities which have high decay rates.
Now, I always associate your name also with Tim Rainey, and
yes, are you down in Texas? Yes,
Refugio, Texas.
Yeah, Tim and I have been friends for many years. He was probably one of the first people who came on board after Chris Kammer with ozone. Tim has a beautiful system that he integrates ozone into an air abrasion system, so that he actually ozone treats the tooth as he's treating it. And I think that's a fantastic application that he's actually put together and invented. So, yeah, Tim would definitely be on my. And if you're going to be at the meeting next year, Howard, you'll meet Tim there as well.
Tim Rainey's going to go there again?
Absolutely, yeah.
No, I actually took all four of my boys at Tim Rainey's course because I was talking to Andy for a hobby. He likes to shoot machine guns and pig hunting, and I have four boys, and the oldest one likes to hunt. And Dad and the other three boys, we just go with them. I won't shoot anything unless I'd eat it. Like I have no problem shooting a cow, but I have no interest in eating a deer or an elk or a pig or any of that stuff. But anyway, we went down there, and Tim was so adorable to my four boys, and he gave them these big old machine guns and took them out there, and they were shooting that. And they probably remember that dentist more than any dentist around the world with those big machine guns. So what does an ozone machine look like? I mean, and how much is this? And when you seal off a mouth and pump it full of O3 to be extra caustic to a gram-negative anaerobe that can't live in oxygen, how much is that machine, and how portable is it? And talk more about the machine.
Okay, the size of the machine is probably about the size of a shoebox to much bigger. I mean, it just depends on sort of what sort of machine you're looking for and what you want it to do and what else you want to do with it. So something like the Helazone was a size, probably weighed about 15 kilos and was quite heavy. The CMU3, which I helped design and which I now sell through GreyCell, that's about the size of a shoebox and probably weighs about 2 pounds, not much more than that. In terms of cost, anywhere from about $5,000 upwards, again, depending on what you want it to do. You can either have a low concentration stream of ozone, in which case you've got to expose the tooth to slightly longer treatment. So that allows you to have a cheaper machine, or you have a much more concentrated ozone device where you need to seal off the tooth in some way. So the Heal Ozone and some of the other ozone systems work by forming have a little cap which you put around the tooth. I always found that quite awkward, and certainly for me, the key to the success of a Heal Ozone was always going to be about how easy is it to actually make the seal around the tooth before the machine will actually operate. And a lot of dentists found that very difficult. So that was why we designed the CMU3, which was just an open stream, but you need to very carefully control how the ozone or where it goes to. What it does to the bacteria, it instantly kills them. It is such a short treatment time, Howard, that it allows you to move on very predictably in dentistry from you're not quite sure if you've left a little bit of infection and is that filling going to fail at some stage in the future. And what ozone does is it doesn't matter if you leave a little bit of infected dentine there, because the remineralization will take place anyway. The bugs are all dead, but the micronutrients are all gone. They've all been oxidized. You've got an improved pH, which is going to generate secondary dentine and secondary remineralization. So dentistry becomes incredibly more predictable. And as I said earlier, ozone has a place in every single facet of dentistry, irrespective of what you want to quote in terms of a dental application. Ozone has a part to play in it. So for me, the future of dentistry is all about infection control. I mean, caries is just an infection of hard tissue. The issue becomes, how do you have access to it? How can you get at the infection? How can you actually recognize what's going on? How can you diagnose it at such an early stage where you don't need to drill and fill? And that's where Diagnostic and where air abrasion has a part to play, because by combining these technologies, which is part of courses and part of what we teach, is that you don't have to drill and fill. So if I take the listeners back to, it's a beautiful scene in the Little Shop of Horrors where the dentist gets on his knees and he's got this lovely altar, and instead of his mama, if you put a couple of turbines there, that's where dentistry is for a lot of people. They worship the dental drill because that's what they know. And for me, the real success is taking a dentist out of that shrine area and saying, you don't have to drill and fill. All you need to do is sterilize it, find a way to seal it successfully for a long term, and then that patient has probably got a much better treatment. Because remember, it's all about how much tooth tissue can we preserve. As soon as you make a teeny weeny hole in a tooth, you're going to lose the strength of that tooth, and that's something which Graham Milovich and Ray Bertolotti are talking quite soon. You've got the two key leaders of dental materials and dental materials in the US talking together on the same platform. Graham, who is coming up from New Zealand, Ray, who lives in Los Angeles and so on, San Francisco Bay Area. The two of them are doing round robin meetings around the US later in the year, and for me, that is a golden opportunity for people who have never heard them before. Go and listen to Graham, go and listen to Ray, because you will learn so much about where dentistry is, what we should be doing, but also what the research is showing us, how much we've destroyed in just making a teeny weeny hole in the tooth. I mean, it's frightening how it really is if you look at some of the research of how we set our patients up for failure.
Well, and I'm going to end on that note. First of all, I absolutely love and adore Raymond Bertolotti. I think he's a legend in dentistry. His wife, Mary, is beyond adorable, and he's just amazing. And we are out of time, and I just love the internet so much to be able to be talking to a dentist all the way from South Africa, bordering, what do you border? Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique.
Absolutely. And a lot of the South Atlantic and the Antarctica, you name it, it's somewhere down here.
And I still, if I had to name the most magical place I've ever been in my entire life, It's the Serengeti area, the area around Mount Kilimanjaro to the equator. I mean, my God, I when you're in the Serengeti, you just literally can't believe that places like this still exist on Earth. And I have to tell you, when I went to Tanzania, if I didn't have four boys and a granddaughter living back in America, I could have stayed there the rest of my life. I mean, it was just amazing. But on that note, do you think um, I, hopefully you should do a search, Dr. Holmes, on Dentaltown for Ozone? There's literally we have 202,000 registered dentists on Dentaltown, and they've posted 4 million times. And when I did a search for Ozone, it pulled up 100 threads of dentists discussing ozone. And
Yep.
I wish you and your friends would chime in and tell and share your thoughts. And of course, it's hard to get two dentists to agree that today is Tuesday, so they're not going to agree on
Well,
ozone.
here's
But what I like to do is I like to give a voice to dentists from around the world, and I don't work for the Centers for Disease Control or the FDA. And you've been publishing for 30 years. You've lectured all over. I've seen you lecture in various meetings, and it was an honor and a privilege. It's 10 o'clock in the morning here. What time is it in South Africa?
we're 7 o'clock in the
Seven,
evening.
7 o'clock in the evening. So you're 9 hours ahead. So on that note, I
Absolutely.
just want to say, Julian, thank you so much. It was great to hear your voice again. Sorry the video didn't come through, but that's okay. Probably 85% of our listeners do sound only anyway, so no big deal. But I hope you have a rocking good day, and I can't wait to see you again in person.
And you too, Had. Take care.